So with President Obama essentially getting a peace deal with Cuba and ending our ridiculous approach of giving them the cold shoulder and hating them since they kicked us out when we were colonizing them, Republican Senator Marco Rubio is mad about it, and he has some words for Obama.
I'm not in favor of the process by which his release was acquired, because I think it does set a very dangerous precedent. It puts a price on every American abroad. Governments now know that if they can take an American hostage, they can get very significant concessions from the United States. But later today, the President, I believe, will announce measures that go well beyond simply the release of Mr. Gross. I think they will entail things like normalized diplomatic relations between the United States and Cuba, the opening up of more commerce and trade with a dictatorship. My interest in Cuba has always been the furthering of democracy and freedom. I think the people of Cuba have a right, if they are free, to choose any economic system they want. Nothing the President will announce today is going to further that goal. And it's ironic that a week after we imposed sanctions on human rights violators in Venezuela, we are lifting sanctions on a government that has taught the Venezuelans how to commit these human rights violations. It's absurd. And it's part of a long record of coddling dictators and tyrants that this administration has established.
Well, as you know, the Cuban embargo has been in place for 50 years, since the early 1960s, and that is law in America. So legally, what could the President do now?
Well, the President can increase the amount of remittances. He can increase the participation of U.S. telecommunications companies within Cuba. The problem that I have is not those measures. The problem is that in return, the Cubans have agreed to do things like release political prisoners and allow more internet access on the island. But they're creating no economic openings. There is no concessions on freedom of speech, no concessions on elections, no concessions on the freedom to have alternative political parties, no concessions on ever having elections or anything of that matter. What democratic concessions? And this notion that somehow being able to travel more to Cuba and send more money to Cuba and travel and sell more consumer products in Cuba, the idea that that is going to lead to some democratic opening is absurd.
So let me get this straight. According to Marco Rubio, we have to agree with any nation we have any relationship with 100%. They have to have the same policies that we do on freedom of speech, capitalism, government, every issue you can name, political parties, etc., etc. Well, Marco, we would have to cut ties with every single nation, because there's no nation on Earth that has the exact same structure and system that we do. Now, understand something. Do I agree that they should have freedom of speech in Cuba, and they should increase that kind of freedom, that they should not have a one-party state? Of course I agree with that. But that doesn't mean that if they don't do that, we never, ever, ever talk to them ever, and we sanction them, and we embargo them, and we further hurt the population of the country who Marco Rubio pretends like he's trying to help. Well, if you really want to help them, that doesn't mean they have to meet every single criteria before we even have a conversation with them. That's a silly, childish way of looking at the world. And again, think about it. He said, we need to further democracy and freedom in Cuba before we even talk to them. Well, okay, then why are we still working with China? They have a terrible human rights record. Why are we dealing with Saudi frickin' Arabia? I mean, they're the worst of the worst. I don't hear you calling for cutting ties with them, so of course you're just being convenient and flip-flopping in terms of whatever your feelings are that day. And furthermore, our human rights record is terrible. We just had this gigantic report about how the CIA was torturing people. So Marco Rubio, if people in other countries went by your standard, everybody should sever ties with the U.S. Nobody should trade with us anymore. Nobody should talk to us anymore. We should be totally isolated, and our economy would absolutely collapse. So that's the thing. He's just a silly guy making silly arguments. Something about Marco Rubio pisses me off more than even other Republican politicians. You know what it is? I think he's just an empty suit. Like, you could tell it's all rhetoric with him, and it's all like, let me stick to my talking points, and let me, from day to day, I'll change my mind. In fact, this happened during the torture debate. One day, he tweeted something that was in favor of releasing the report, and then the next day, he came out and tweeted the exact opposite. Now, you could say, well, look, that's probably one of his staffers who was tweeting it, and it wasn't him, so he's not responsible for it. But, okay, give it to one staffer. Don't give it a 2, and don't make sure that staffer doesn't tweet retarded things in your name because it reflects on you. But then again, I mean, we're talking about Marco Rubio here. He's already diminished his political standing in everybody's eyes. I mean, look, I know it's a silly thing to bring up, but I really do think it shows something. The water drinking incident. You remember that? When he's in the middle of the speech, like, had to reach over and drink it real quick and put it down. Now, people would gloss over this, whatever, man, he just had cotton mouth, he needed to take a sip in the middle of his speech. But the way he did it is telling. How did he do it? He didn't keep it real. He didn't go, excuse me, I need to take a sip of water, and just, or you don't even need to necessarily say anything. You just take a regular sip and put it back. But what did he do? He did this thing where, like, in his own mind, he thought that you couldn't see him, and he rushed and drank it while he's still staring at the teleprompter, and then he comes back up and he's like, acted like it didn't happen. And that's a level of self-delusion that's not normal. It's so clear at that point that you're an empty suit. You're a robot who is a shell of a human being. You are filling the role of what you think a politician is supposed to be. You're not genuine. You're not serious. And let me ask him this. This is the most important point. He says, well, I want to affect them. I want to change the society and give them more democracy and more freedom. Okay, well, what do you think it leaves us a better chance of doing that? If we continue the embargo and continue to sanction them and continue to block travel and continue to not talk to them, is that more likely to change them? Or is it more likely to change them to get closer to them and move more in their direction and have more conversations with them and put an embassy there and do all this stuff? Of course that's going to give you a better chance at changing the situation. God, again, to disagree on this means you're flat out, it means they're against peace. That's what it means. The Democrat Menendez also released a statement on this, and he said, the U.S. now vindicated Cuba and all their wrong actions. Really? Is that what we did? So anybody who we ever have a conversation with and anybody who we ever talk to, any state, that means by default we agree with everything they've ever done in human history. Well, look, right today we're big allies with Germany, so I guess we were pro-Nazi, right? Because you said it. Hey, you're validating everything Germany ever did by talking to them. So I guess that the U.S. government is just pro-Adolf Hitler. I guess that's what's going on here, right? That's your argument. That's not my argument. That's what you said. That's what you said. It's amazing how when people don't want to change their mind politically, they'll just say anything to back up their point, no matter how stupid it sounds, no matter how vacuous it is. It's just like verbal diarrhea for everybody to see. Me no like Cuba. Bleh, stop. Let's continue to embargo them. Bleh. What's your reasoning? Please explain to me your position. Well said. I think we should go with that policy.